Well, let's take a closer look now at the toughest ever sanctions imposed on the DPRK's economy. Based on the resolution passed by the UN in August, the fresh sanctions still focus on three categories: limits on imports, exports and DPRK overseas workers. It also ratchets up the pressure. Imports of both refined and crude oil will be capped at 6 million barrels a year, a 30% cut. The U.S. ambassador to the UN said 90% of the DPRK's reported exports have been banned by sanctions. Textiles, which account for a quarter of export income, are fully banned. The limits on new visas for overseas workers will also cut off about $500 million tax revenues per year. Let's get more now on that story. We can cross to Beijing, and I'm joined by CGTN's Han Peng. Han Peng, as we heard there, China wants those sanctions against the DPRK implemented in a comprehensive way. Can you tell us more about that?
Exactly. Completely and comprehensively is how China says it will implement sanctions slapped by the UN on the DPRK. It's the third UN resolution on the issue in 5 weeks and the 9th sanctions against Pyongyang since it started its first nuclear test in 2006. But over the decade, it seemed that sanctions alone are not really working. This month, Pyongyang announced it had successfully detonated its first hydrogen bomb that can be carried by intercontinental ballistic missiles. So China stressed that sanctions must be accompanied by talks and negotiations. It aims at a peaceful denuclearization of DPRK. Beijing also repeated its calls for a double suspension approach, saying that it is by far the most realistic option that has emerged. It means that the DPRK should suspend its weapon program first in exchange for the United States and South Korea to halt military drills against Pyongyang.
So does China, though, support this push by the United States and the United Nations for African countries to cut ties with the DPRK?
Well, in fact, China is by no means cutting its ties or push other countries to cut ties with the DPRK. The primary goal of China to pressure Pyongyang is not to isolate the country or cause regime change, but rather it is to cut the funding of its weapon programs. On the contrary, Beijing actually calls for more engagement with the DPRK, stressing that talks and negotiations are necessary to solve the problem. China's DPRK policy can actually be summed up into 3 no's: no nuclear weapon programs, no instability caused by regime change, and no war on China's doorstep.
So U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has been meeting with Chinese State Councilor Yang Jiechi in the United States. What's the aim of the visit, and what can we expect when it comes to the situation in the DPRK?
Right, as the 2 senior diplomats are meeting in the United States, DPRK is definitely on their agenda. But the main goal of this visit is more than that. It's actually a preparation for U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to China, which will happen later this year. Trump agreed to visit China when he met with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Florida this April. Yang said that he hopes that both sides will work jointly to make Trump's visit a big success here in China.
Right, Han Peng joining us there from Beijing. Thank you.